In September 1941, German troops outside Leningrad came under fire from heavy naval guns. The weapons were German. Their barrels, turret mechanisms, and ammunition systems had been manufactured for a German warship. The hull beneath them had been launched from a German shipyard only 2 years earlier. Yet the men operating those guns were Soviet. The vessel was Petropavlovsk, an unfinished heavy cruiser trapped inside Leningrad. It could not perform the mission for which it had been designed. Its machinery remained incomplete. Half of its planned main battery was missing. It could not sail out to hunt enemy ships or maneuver as a conventional cruiser. But 4 203mm guns still worked, and those guns were now firing at the country that had built them. The ship had not been captured in battle. It had not been seized from an occupied port. Nazi Germany had voluntarily transferred it to the Soviet Union during the temporary partnership created by Hitler and Stalin. Germany wanted resources. Stalin wanted technology. Both governments believed they could benefit from the transaction without giving the other side too much. 16 months later, that calculation was being tested by artillery fire. To understand why Germany handed the Soviet Union an unfinished modern cruiser, it is necessary to return to a moment when the two future enemies were still exchanging raw materials, weapons, machinery, and military knowledge. In early 1940, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were not natural allies. Their governments were divided by ideology, territorial ambition, and mutual suspicion. Hitler had built much of his political movement around hostility toward communism. Stalin had no reason to believe that German expansion would stop permanently at the borders established after the invasion of Poland. For the moment, however, each government possessed something the other needed. Germany was at war with Britain and France. The Royal Navy's blockade threatened to restrict German access to imported resources. A modern war economy consumed oil, grain, metals, cotton, ores, timber, and other materials on an enormous scale. The Soviet Union could supply many of them. Stalin's government faced a different problem. The Soviet state possessed immense industrial ambitions, but its factories and design bureaus could not instantly master every advanced technology required by a modern military. Soviet leaders wanted machine tools, industrial equipment, aircraft, artillery, naval systems, technical drawings, and manufacturing knowledge. Germany could supply them. The relationship was therefore not built on trust, it was built on exchange. Soviet raw materials would move west. German machinery and military technology would move east. Each side expected to strengthen itself faster than it strengthened the other. On 11 February 1940, German and Soviet representatives signed a major commercial agreement in Moscow. Soviet commodities were to be balanced by German industrial products and military equipment delivered over an extended schedule. The names at the bottom of the agreement belonged to officials, including Soviet Trade Commissar Anastas Mikoyan and German economic negotiators. It was not a private contract personally drafted by Hitler and Stalin. But the agreement existed because their governments had created the political conditions for it. The arrangement was extraordinarily broad. It included industrial machinery, aircraft, artillery, communications equipment, naval weapons, and entire manufacturing processes. Among the naval items appeared one particularly valuable object, the unfinished German heavy cruiser Lützow. Germany was not offering Stalin an obsolete vessel waiting to be scrapped. Lützow belonged to the newest generation of German heavy cruisers. Its hull had been launched only months earlier. The Soviet request went far beyond acquiring a ship that might one day fly the Soviet naval ensign. Soviet specialists wanted access to the knowledge behind it. They wanted drawings, specifications, weapons, spare parts, technical information, and German experience. For Stalin's government, Lützow could become both a warship and a floating technical school. For Germany, the unfinished vessel presented a different calculation. German officials could reasonably judge that a ship still dependent on German equipment, expertise, and years of difficult completion posed less immediate danger than a battle-ready cruiser. The ship might eventually become useful to the Soviet Navy, but Germany would receive raw materials and economic value immediately. The danger lay in the timetable. The Soviet Union believed it was buying a shortcut into modern naval technology. Germany was transferring an unfinished project whose future still depended heavily on German cooperation. Before that weakness could become decisive, Lützow first had to leave Germany. The ship was the fifth and final member of the Admiral Hipper-class. It should not be confused with the older German warship Deutschland, which was also renamed Lützow. The vessel sold to the Soviet Union was a different ship, a new heavy cruiser under construction at the AG Weser yard in Bremen. Its keel had been laid in August 1937. The hull was launched on 1 July 1939. A completed Admiral Hipper-class cruiser was intended to combine high speed with a powerful main battery. 4 twin turrets would carry 8 203mm guns. Turbines were expected to drive the ship at more than 30 knots, giving it the mobility required of a modern surface warship. But launching created a hull, not an operational cruiser. Lützow still required machinery, weapons, electrical systems, fire control equipment, communications, ammunition handling systems, and specialist labor before it could enter service. The hull represented thousands of tons of steel and years of industrial work. Yet it offered Germany no immediate combat power. It could not join the fleet, escort another warship, attack merchant shipping, or challenge an enemy cruiser. It was potential rather than capability. That distinction made Lützow attractive to both governments for opposite reasons. To Soviet naval planners, the hull offered access to a modern German design without waiting for an equivalent Soviet project to move from a drawing office to the shipyard. Soviet engineers could study the vessel as it was completed. Its machinery and weapons could reveal German solutions to difficult naval engineering problems. To German authorities, its unfinished condition reduced its immediate military value and made a sale easier to justify. The surviving record does not identify one single reason why Lützow, rather than another unfinished hull, became the ship Germany agreed to release. But the fact that it could not yet fight was clearly important. Germany also did not approve every Soviet naval request. The Soviet purchasing program was ambitious. It sought naval designs, artillery equipment, machinery, information about important German ships, and other advanced military products. What Berlin was willing to release depended on military value, industrial availability, price, and the amount of technical access German authorities were prepared to concede. Lützow was one ship Germany was prepared to place on the negotiating table. But the Soviet Union was not buying only the steel already assembled in Bremen. If Germany had transferred nothing more than the hull, Stalin would have received an enormous shell filled with missing systems and unanswered questions. The detailed agreement was intended to solve that problem. Germany would provide equipment, armament, spare parts, construction plans, specifications, working drawings, and technical information. The Soviets were also to receive data connected to the trials and performance of related German cruisers. That transformed the transaction. Lützow was no longer simply an unfinished ship being sold abroad. It had become a controlled transfer of naval technology from one suspicious power to another. The advantage for the Soviet Union was obvious. It could examine not merely what German designers had built, but how they expected the ship's machinery, weapons, and control systems to function together. The cost was less visible. The Soviet Union could own the whole. But until the promised equipment arrived and Soviet specialists understood how to integrate it, Germany would still control part of the ship's future. In April 1940, preparations began to move Lützow east. The vessel could not make the journey under its own power. Its propulsion system was incomplete, and it had never been commissioned. It therefore had to be towed from Bremen through the Baltic and toward Leningrad. The transfer revealed the strange condition of the ship. It was too advanced to be treated as raw material, but too incomplete to operate as a warship. It possessed the shape and scale of a modern cruiser without all the systems that would make that shape functional. Germany formally transferred the vessel in April. On 31 May 1940, the incomplete hull reached Leningrad. Soviet engineers now faced an extraordinary task. They had to continue a construction process begun in another country, under another Navy's standards, using documentation prepared for German shipyards, German equipment, and German crews. The Soviet completion project received the designation Project 83. In September, the ship was renamed Petropavlovsk. A new name established Soviet ownership. It did not remove German dependency. The agreement required Germany to provide armament, equipment, spare parts, working drawings, plans, specifications, and technical information according to a detailed delivery schedule. On paper, these items could be arranged as a list. Inside a warship, they had to function as one system. A turbine could not move the ship unless boilers produced steam, shafts transmitted power, pumps circulated fluids, and electrical systems supplied the equipment around them. A gun could not fight simply because its barrel had been installed. It required ammunition, loading machinery, power, fire control data, communications, and crews trained to keep it operating under stress. A completed-looking superstructure could conceal unfinished command spaces, missing cables, absent instruments, and machinery that had not yet arrived. This was the central weakness of the Soviet purchase. The hull could be delivered once. Completion required continuing cooperation. German specialists were needed to explain systems unfamiliar to Soviet workers. Manuals had to be interpreted. Machinery arriving from Germany had to match foundations, cables, pipes, and connections already prepared in Leningrad. The work exposed the friction hidden inside the political agreement. German and Soviet officials disagreed over aspects of training and technical access. Language complicated instruction. Soviet specialists wanted as much German experience as possible, while German authorities remained cautious about how much knowledge they were prepared to transfer. The relationship remained cooperative, but it was never comfortable. The Soviet Union nevertheless gained something important before Petropavlovsk fired a single shot. Its engineers could inspect the hull, armor arrangement, turret mechanisms, construction standards, and internal layout of a modern German heavy cruiser. They possessed the physical object around which technical study could be organized. But studying a ship was not the same as finishing it. The Soviet completion program had inherited a design created for German factories, German suppliers, German naval doctrine, and German training systems. Every attempt to adapt it consumed time. From Berlin's perspective, that delay reduced the immediate danger of the sale. The Soviet Union had acquired advanced technology, but it had not acquired a battle-ready cruiser. From Moscow's perspective, the delay was the price of taking a shortcut. Petropavlovsk might still be completed faster than an equivalent Soviet cruiser could be designed and built from the beginning, provided German deliveries continued. The ship in Leningrad was therefore being completed through a partnership whose durability neither government could safely assume. From a distance, Petropavlovsk could appear close to becoming a real warship. Its hull was afloat. Sections of superstructure rose above the deck. Main gun turrets had been installed. Workers moved through machinery spaces and compartments already enclosed by steel. Specialist accounts later described the vessel as approximately 70% complete by the summer of 1941. But a completion percentage could be deceptive. Much of a warship's visible weight was contained in its hull, armor, decks, and structural components. These could be present while the systems required for movement and combat remained unfinished. A ship could be 70% complete and still be unable to perform nearly all of its intended mission. Petropavlovsk had been designed to carry 8 main guns in 4 twin turrets. Only 2 twin turrets were available. 4 203mm guns had been installed. The other half of the planned battery was absent. The machinery and supporting installations also remained incomplete. The cruiser could not operate as an independent naval unit. It lacked both the full armament and the integrated systems required to fight the war its German designers had imagined. Soviet workers attempted to close that gap. They were not simply assembling familiar Soviet machinery inside a Soviet hull. They were adapting foreign equipment to a project whose original technical network remained in Germany. Drawings could show where a component belonged. They could not manufacture a missing component. Manuals could describe an operating procedure. They could not replace instructors, spare parts, or practical experience. Soviet physical possession of Petropavlovsk was secure. Soviet technical control remained incomplete. Not every delay should be treated as sabotage. War production was complicated. German factories had competing priorities. Export schedules involved multiple organizations. Training disputes and administrative friction were real. The evidence does not justify turning every missing component into part of a secret German plan to cripple the ship. Deliberate sabotage was not required for the project to remain vulnerable. Ordinary delay was dangerous enough. By the end of 1940, Germany was preparing for an invasion of the Soviet Union. On 18 December, Hitler issued the directive for Operation Barbarossa. Trade and technical cooperation continued even as Germany assembled forces for invasion. Petropavlovsk sat at the center of this contradiction. The ship was German in design, Soviet in ownership, and dependent on cooperation between governments moving toward war. Its two installed turrets represented the progress already made. The empty positions where the other turrets should have stood revealed how much remained unfinished. On 22 June 1941, German forces crossed the Soviet frontier. Operation Barbarossa ended the commercial partnership in a single morning. The German state that had promised Petropavlovsk's missing equipment was now attempting to destroy the Soviet Union. Future deliveries disappeared, training arrangements became irrelevant, German assistance could no longer continue. The Soviet Navy was left with the hull already in Leningrad, the equipment already installed, the drawings already received, and whatever knowledge Soviet engineers had managed to absorb. Everything else would have to be replaced, improvised, or abandoned. Petropavlovsk had been designed as a fast, ocean-going cruiser. It now faced a war without being able to sail into it. The problem was no longer how to complete the vessel according to the original German plans. The problem was how to extract military value from an unfinished machine before the German army reached Leningrad. The German advance transformed the city from a shipbuilding center into a threatened fortress. Factories, naval bases, transport routes, and civilian districts came under increasing pressure as German and Finnish forces approached the region. Every available weapon acquired new importance. Petropavlovsk could not be sent to sea as a conventional cruiser. Its unfinished machinery prevented it from using speed as protection. Half of its planned main battery had never been installed. Completing every missing system was no longer a realistic wartime objective, but the two existing turrets still contained 4 heavy guns. A 203mm naval weapon did not need a fully operational cruiser beneath it to remain dangerous. If its turret could be powered, supplied with ammunition, aimed and directed toward a target, it could deliver heavy shells far beyond the immediate harbor area. The Soviet solution was not to finish the entire ship. It was to make the useful part fight. Petropavlovsk was adapted into a stationary artillery platform. Its available main guns could support the defense of Leningrad from a fixed position, even though the vessel could not fulfill the naval role for which it had been designed. This was a practical adaptation, not a restoration of the original concept. An operational cruiser combined movement, protection, weapons, communications, and trained crews. Petropavlovsk could offer only part of that system. Its wartime value would come from isolating one functioning capability and abandoning almost everything else. The decision offered an immediate advantage. Heavy naval guns could strike German positions from within the Soviet defensive area. The ship could draw ammunition and technical support from the naval facilities around Leningrad. Its large hull provided a stable firing platform. But the same decision imposed an unavoidable cost. Petropavlovsk could not maneuver after revealing its position. A mobile warship could alter course, change speed, withdraw, or move beyond the range of an enemy battery. A stationary vessel could do none of those things. Once its guns opened fire, German observers could begin identifying the source. Sound ranging, muzzle flashes, aerial observation, and battlefield reports could help enemy artillery locate the ship. The adaptation preserved firepower by sacrificing mobility. For the defenders of Leningrad, this was not necessarily a poor exchange. The city itself could not move. Its defensive weapons had to fight from the positions available to them. Petropavlovsk had failed to become the cruiser Stalin's government intended to acquire. But it could still become part of the city's artillery defense. Workers and naval personnel prepared the functioning turrets. Ammunition was brought aboard. Fire control arrangements were adapted to the ship's limited condition. Soviet crews learned to operate German weapons inside a Soviet defensive system. The ship's identity had changed again. It had begun as a German heavy cruiser. It had crossed the Baltic as a Soviet construction project. It was now becoming a fixed gun battery inside a besieged city. The missing turrets no longer represented only failure. 4 guns were insufficient to create the intended cruiser. They were enough to create a dangerous artillery position. On 7 September 1941, Petropavlovsk opened fire against German forces around Leningrad. The historical reversal was complete. The ship Germany had sold to the Soviet Union was using German-manufactured 203mm guns against the German army. The image is powerful because it seems to reduce the entire relationship between Hitler and Stalin to one act of strategic blindness. The reality was more limited and more revealing. Petropavlovsk did not fight as a heavy cruiser. It did not steam into the Baltic, seek out German warships, or threaten Germany's sea routes. It remained an incomplete and largely immobile platform. Its guns, nevertheless, contributed to the Soviet artillery effort. The German-designed turrets gave the defenders heavy artillery capable of striking German positions selected through the wider Soviet fire control system. Petropavlovsk was not alone. The Baltic Fleet, coastal batteries, railway artillery, field guns, and other naval vessels all contributed to the defense of the city. The struggle around Leningrad involved forces and suffering on a scale far beyond one unfinished ship. The cruiser did not save Leningrad by itself, but it was armed, available, and positioned inside a city that needed every functioning heavy gun. The weakness built into the conversion soon became clear. Petropavlovsk could fire, but it could not escape. German artillery responded. Repeated hits struck the stationary vessel. Steel designed to withstand naval combat now absorbed punishment without the benefit of movement or a complete damage control organization. On 17 September, German heavy artillery disabled Petropavlovsk. Badly flooded, the ship was left settled in shallow water where Soviet salvage teams could still reach it. The gun platform had worked. Its immobility had also made the result predictable. Shallow water turned destruction into a potentially temporary condition. A vessel resting near repair facilities might be recovered in a way that a ship lost in deep water could not. Petropavlovsk remained inside the Soviet defensive zone. Its hull could still be reached by workers, divers, engineers, and salvage teams. In April 1942, the Luftwaffe launched a major attack against Soviet naval forces at Leningrad. Petropavlovsk was hit again and suffered further damage. Even then, the ship's story did not end. Soviet crews eventually raised the vessel and moved it for repair. The work did not transform it into the cruiser promised in the original German plans. The objective was more limited: restore whatever military value could still be extracted from the hull and guns. After repair, the vessel returned to limited artillery duties. It later supported Soviet operations as pressure on Leningrad was reduced and German forces were driven away from the city. Its survival was another example of the strange value of an incomplete machine. Petropavlovsk had never possessed the complete systems required for its intended role. It had been disabled by artillery and damaged from the air. Yet a recoverable hull, heavy weapons, nearby shipyard labor, and Soviet determination allowed part of it to remain useful. This should not be confused with success as a cruiser. The original Admiral Hipper design had never been tested in Petropavlovsk's service. That concept assumed a mobile warship with a complete main battery, propulsion system, fire control, communications, and a fully trained crew. Petropavlovsk possessed only fragments of that system. What combat tested was the Soviet decision to turn an unfinished ship into a stationary battery. The result was mixed. The guns delivered useful fire. The ship could not protect itself through movement. German fire could disable it, but its position in shallow water made recovery possible. It contributed to the defense, but it remained only one weapon within a much larger Soviet effort. The transaction had produced something Germany had not intended: a German-built artillery platform firing against German troops. It had not produced what Stalin originally intended either. The Soviet Union still did not possess a completed heavy cruiser. On 1 September 1944, Petropavlovsk was renamed Tallinn. The new name did not mark the completion of the cruiser. The political partnership that had created the project was gone. The German supply network had disappeared. Much of the ship's machinery remained unfinished, damaged, or overtaken by years of wartime use. Finishing Tallinn after the war would have required far more than repairing battle damage. Soviet planners would have needed to replace missing equipment, redesign incompatible systems, install new weapons, and complete a hull conceived before the war according to foreign standards. By then, naval technology and Soviet priorities were changing. A heavy cruiser designed in the late 1930s was no longer automatically worth completing at almost any cost. New Soviet ships could be constructed around domestic equipment, established supply networks, and lessons learned during the war. The German cruiser had once promised a shortcut. After years of damage and incomplete construction, finishing it risked becoming more expensive than starting again. Plans for further work did not restore the original vision. The vessel was eventually reduced to secondary roles, serving as a stationary training or accommodation ship before being removed from service and dismantled. It never became the cruiser Germany had designed. It never became the cruiser Stalin had expected to receive. Was the sale a German strategic disaster? Germany received immediate economic value through the wider trade relationship. The Soviet Union received an incomplete hull, technical knowledge, and 4 heavy guns that eventually became useful in battle. The later reversal made Germany's risk visible, but it did not transform Petropavlovsk into the completed cruiser Stalin had sought. Both sides gained something. Neither gained what it originally expected. Germany did transfer military technology to a state it would invade 16 months later. It supplied a hull, weapons, documentation, and enough working equipment for German-built guns to be used against German troops. That consequence was real. The men under fire outside Leningrad did not benefit from the argument that the ship was incomplete. The shells arriving from its turrets were no less dangerous because the machinery below deck could not carry the vessel to sea. In that narrow sense, Germany helped create a weapon that was later turned against it. But Nazi Germany did not hand Stalin a completed, battle-ready cruiser. The Soviet Union received a dependent construction project. Its engineers could study the ship, but they could not finish it before German cooperation ended. Its battery remained incomplete. Its machinery never allowed it to perform the mobile naval mission for which it had been built. The deeper failure belonged to both calculations. Germany believed it could transfer enough technology to secure immediate economic advantage without creating a serious future threat. The Soviet Union believed it could acquire a sophisticated foreign warship without remaining dependent on the supplier. The war destroyed both assumptions. What survived was not the original cruiser concept, but the part of the machine that could be separated from it. 4 heavy guns. They did not require the ship to reach 30 knots. They did not require all 4 turrets to be installed. They did not require Petropavlovsk to enter the Baltic as a completed warship. They required a stable platform, ammunition, trained crews, and targets within range. That was enough to give the unfinished ship a wartime role. It was also enough to create one of the strangest material reversals of the German-Soviet relationship. A hull designed in Bremen was delivered to Leningrad under a commercial agreement. German specialists helped explain its systems. Soviet workers attempted to finish what German industry had begun. Then the political agreement vanished. The German army approached, and the surviving guns were turned against the troops of the country that had built them. Below deck remained unfinished machinery and missing systems. On deck stood the empty positions where half of the intended main battery had never arrived. Above them, 2 surviving turrets had fired at the forces of their original builder. Lützow had been designed to cross oceans as a German heavy cruiser. Its most important battle was fought as an unfinished Soviet battery that could barely move at all.